Has Trump lost the war? He keeps flip-flopping about negotiations. Is he going to come to any conclusion with Iran? The world is literally going into an economic meltdown. Of course, all the nations are now stirring because they realize that Trump could take the entire globe down the tube with him. As in the studio, of course, I've got with me Patrick Henningsen from the 21st Century Wire. Do check out his YouTube. Do like, share, subscribe, and support channels like 21st Century Wire and DZP, because we rely on that support. We are heavily censored. We don't get the financial traction that we need to take on legacy media, which is lying to you, in your faces more and more day by day. So having given my plug, let's get back into this issue about Iran, the US war, and where we are now, and where we're likely to end up in the next few weeks. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you.
Good to see you again. And you were in Iran. The last time you appeared on Deep Dive Perspective, firstly, you hadn't been there, but you were about to go. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your impressions of Iran, because the propaganda here within mainstream media is, of course, quite vicious. And they've talked about, almost like a medieval theological theocracy, which is suppressive and oppressive. That's one narrative I'd like to hear your opinions on. But then also how this whole war has panned out. Who's won, who's lost, and where are we now with the Hormuz Strait in the situation that it is, and this blockade, and the actual cutting off of the straits by Iran initially, essentially is the new game in town. It's gone beyond nuclear proliferation, etc. We've got a new nuclear bomb issue, literally the global economy.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be with you. Last time we spoke, the war drums were beating. We certainly spoke about that, and everybody was trying to anticipate how it was going to play out. Shortly after that, I had an opportunity to get press accreditation to go to the Islamic Republic of Iran, knowing full well that U.S. naval assets were literally parked off the southern flank in the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean, with their crosshairs firmly set on a campaign against Iran. You just didn't know when it was going to kick off. Yeah. I saw a window of opportunity that didn't know how long it would be, so I just took it. It was very difficult to get there. It's very expensive, very fraught with a lot of paperwork. Let's just put it that way. But anyway, I got there, and you know what? It was all worth it. And I arrived on the National Day. And so that is the equivalent of their Independence Day. This is the anniversary of the founding of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So that was about February 12th, 13th. It was right around the time Netanyahu was in Washington, selling the war to Trump. We found out later. But what I was told was that the country is divided, that the regime has lost control because of these protests that they alleged that the government killed 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, whatever thousand, many tens of thousands of protesters they claim were killed by the, quote, regime, and that they're just going to be toppled, and the incoming U.S. strikes or Israeli strikes could, basically upend the entire government of the Islamic Republic. What I witnessed when I arrived was just quite astonishing. There was, roughly 2 million people on the streets of Tehran. I looked at the news reports from around the other cities, Isfahan, Qom, and all the other, Tabriz. All in total, nationwide, over 20 million people came out to support their leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who, rest in peace, was assassinated shortly after, sadly, but they came out and supported their government and their leader. And I thought to myself, wow, so this is literally the opposite of what I'm being told just a few hours ago when I was in the Western media sphere. And I'm thinking, how many European countries where the leader says, we need you out on the street to support me, are going to get millions of people out on the street? It's just not going to happen. So I just knew at that point there was an incredible level of solidarity in this country. There's people not only support, and there's all sections of society. Even then, before the war, you had clearly what looked like secular people out, religious and conservative, yes, families, but also single people. And it was a mixture of different facets of Iranian society. I was also blown away because I really didn't fully appreciate the ethnic diversity of this country. And someone remarked to me, he said, "There's no pure Persian here." He said, "We are Kurdish, we are Turkmen, we are Baluchi, we are part Pakistani, we are part Arabic, we are all these other things, Bedouin even, and all these different Azeri, and it's endless, and the list goes on. So they're all united under a flag, and they have that flag unfurled. I saw people with their own flags they unfurled with like maybe 50 or 60 people carrying their own long flag that they got. And so we should be able to, in the West, in America, that is a republic that is diverse, that has all sorts of different people underneath a national identity, just like the United States is a whole bunch of different people under a national identity. That's a republic. How is that difficult to understand? But it's because of the religious element, which is at the center of Iranian society, that is a country kind of built around. So the integrity of the state relies on that faith. The religious component is very important. And they decided when they had the revolution in 79 that was going to be the thing that everything's built around. And there's certain values attached to that. There's certain morals attached to that. There's ethics and so forth. So that's the only difference, is that the church, if you will, or the religion or faith, it plays a central role in the state and society, whereas in the United States it doesn't. It's a periphery role. So, but besides that, it should be easy to understand. It really should, but it's not. And I think that just shows you the power of the propaganda. Oh, after I left, a week later, the bombs dropped. And that was just horrific to watch because, I sort of bonded with the people I met there very quickly. And I was afraid, I'll tell you, I didn't want to look at my instant messaging because I didn't want to go and even send a message to anybody of the maybe 30 people I met and exchange contacts with. I was afraid to message them because I didn't want to hear bad news coming back the other way, or no news or whatever. So it was, and you realize that's the situation, that's the position that we're in. It's completely outrageous, I think, from an American point of view, how this is allowed to happen, that they could just mark a country for obliteration without any justification whatsoever. It's not like it's the first time it's happened. But there's something about this time that's different.
Well, 61% of the American public now, in a poll, I think it was an ABC poll with Ipsos or something, and they've concluded that people are against the war. Literally, they think it's a mistake for America to have gone and used force. So clearly something's happening on the ground in the US. Donald Trump, his ratings are sliding rapidly. I think you all know very well there. And in terms of his war aims, when he began bombing soon after you left, it was clear that they wanted to create a kind of change in the government at the top level by wiping out the commanders, IRGC commanders, Ayatollah Khamenei. They expected something to happen, no doubt. Did it? That's the first question. And the second was really they wanted to essentially take control of the Islamic Republic of Iran in one shape or form, i.e. control the oil, gas more directly than they have been doing, certainly within the rest of West Asia. Have they achieved any of those objectives?
What you've just mentioned there, they've achieved none of those. But the problem with the United States, specifically with this administration, and I don't think that could have happened any other way, quite frankly, because previous administrations opted not to launch this very same war for the very obvious reasons that they would not be able to justify it. And so the difference between this president, he's gone ahead and launched the war without any, concern whatsoever about providing any kind of a plausible pretext for it.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, this is a war initiated by a foreign power, the state of Israel. Okay, first thing. And this is admitted by the U.S. Secretary of State. He said the reason we had to go to war is because Iran was going to war and we had to go in behind them preemptively because that would have saved American lives. How that works in a convoluted argument sense, I have no idea. But he admitted it on record. So then we know. Now it's clear. So all of this other noise about, oh, Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, this is a straw man argument. They're not developing a nuclear weapon. They haven't been developing a nuclear weapon, but they're sticking to that one. Then the other one is, well, this regime has using the state as tools of repression, the Basij and the IRGC, and they're killing tens of thousands of their own people. That argument was made to provide a moral case for an illegal war. That's what it is. That's the background noise. So you could even go to a MAGA supporter who is a conservative or an independent, maybe a populist, and they're saying, look, I don't like these wars in the Middle East, but this regime they're really bad people. They're slaughtering their own democratic protesters. So even though I don't support the war, it's better that the Ayatollah has been killed. And that will lead to regime change. Of course, all of that fell apart. It didn't happen. It only increased the resilience and solidarity of the population. So worse than that, if there were any pro-Western Iranians, or there was a liberal bloc, or people, let's say, younger than the age of 40, who weren't old enough to remember the revolution, or under 50 even, who had only heard stories from their parents about what happened in the war with Iraq and so forth. Now what they've done is they've given the entire young generation a first-hand experience masterclass in Western imperialism in the most brutal way, of the brutality of Zionism, and also they've more or less demolished the argument that you can somehow compromise with the U.S. and negotiate with them, and that they care about the Iranian people. They don't. It's now clear. The agenda is naked. And the youth in Iran, now they have fortified the revolution in Iran for the next 50 years. Okay? And maybe even more vociferously, what has been on display will have an indelible mark on the next generation of Iranians, even more than their parents' generation, because they've seen the face-to-face with the great Satan, or with the United States and Israel, two most powerful conventional militaries in the world, arguably among the most powerful, and then Israel is among the most powerful. They have taken the direct blow from both of those, and they're still standing. Not only are they still standing, but they're now exerting leverage over America and the rest of the world through the Straits of Hormuz, as you said, this nuclear, the equivalent of a nuclear deterrent. So I'm looking at this on paper, and I'm thinking, well, before the war, America was here, and Iran was here. Now, after 60-plus days, 70 days, now it's like this. America's still powerful, but Iran is no longer here. So relatively speaking, who's the winner?
Yeah.
It has to be the person who has made the most relative gains after, and that is clearly Iran.
Well, there are so many aspects. I think the negotiations are a fascinating area to unpack in themselves, because they bring all these fault lines, win or lose scenarios out. And you've mentioned the nuclear issue. Iran still isn't backing off. They're saying we have, like Argentina or any other nation around the world, has the right to develop their nuclear facilities for peaceful purposes, for energy, etc. And so on that front, they're not shifting. You've got the reparations issue has now become even more important, because the Americans embezzled a lot of Iranian funding back in 1979. That now they're demanding that all gets paid. You've got the whole issue of the reconstruction and the damage, the deaths of the 168 girls and boys in the Minab school, and the reparations to families, the reparations for the damage to thousands and thousands of buildings that have been destroyed. That's also being demanded. I'm seeing also the assertion that there has to be a guarantee of non-violence non-aggression in the future. Who gives that? I don't know. So from having just the nuclear issue to deal with, the Americans have literally opened up a Pandora's box, and Iran is saying, we won the war, essentially. Now we dictate the terms, and we don't even come to negotiations unless all these other aspects of our security and our justice for our people are adhered to. So it leaves Trump in a position where he's actually created a bigger headache for the US. Of course, he's all had the bases all blown up. 17 or 18 of them are almost non-existent, if not completely gone. And at the same time, he's managed to expose himself with the Arab proxies in the region, who he failed to defend, essentially. That's what he failed to do, even though the Iranians didn't take out that country's facilities. Mainly, they went for the American bases and the refineries, maybe to some extent. That paints another picture of the victory of Iran. And when you give us that balance, yeah, I can see where that's coming from. Would you disagree with any of my kind of analysis? And what do you think of these negotiations going forward?
Well, no, I think you've summarized that pretty well. I will also say that the fact that this was an unprovoked war of aggression that was waged by the U.S. and Israel, and Iran did the one thing that nobody has ever dared to do. And it's not the first time they've done it. They did this in January of 2020, which was they attacked a U.S. base in retaliation for an attack. This was in 2020. It was the assassination of Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes. But Qasem Soleimani was Iranian. He was a general. And the response was they flattened a U.S. base. Now, that was during Trump's first term. And the U.S. did not respond. They could do nothing at that. They really caught them off guard. And so this time they said, we're going to hit those countries.
Right.
So don't do it. And they did it. And of course, Iran did exactly what they promised they were going to do. And if you think about that, that is a devastating military defeat for empire, for the U.S., because those are now 17 bases completely demolished, unusable, uninhabited, and they can no longer use them for staging for military operations. They can no longer project power from those. And now on the plus side, that means for those Gulf Arab countries, they're not drawing fire from Iran anymore because the U.S. bases have been blown up. But that's how it started. What was meant to be a protection racket run by the U.S., they couldn't even manage to protect their client states. So then that exposed not only the protection racket, which was, we'll protect you, that's what the U.S. say to the Gulf Arabs, we'll protect you, but you have to buy our weapons as well. You got to pay for this. And Trump wanted to charge them for the privilege of having U.S. forces there. Well, that whole deal is out the window. The other thing that's out the window is, wasn't it just around a year ago or just over, Trump was doing a tour through the Middle East, and he comes back saying, I've secured $2 trillion in investment from the Qataris or from the Emiratis, whatever. They're going to put all this money in America and so forth. None of that's going to happen. It wasn't going to happen anyway, but now it's definitely not going to happen. If anything, the Gulf Arabs they owe Iran reparations for being a party, being a co-belligerent to this attack on Iran. The United States owes reparations to the Iranians, and that's how it's going to go. If there's any kind of agreement, it's going to include reparations, not just sanctions relief, but reparations. I know that's not politically tenable in the U.S., and no congressman or senator is going to even lift sanctions. It would be very unlikely unless there's regime change in Washington by force. And that could, these so crazy what's going on these days, I wouldn't rule that out. But that aside, so that's the real conversation is eventually going to have to be had. And the part of that conversation is also that, they're just flabbergasted in Washington. Marco Rubio and the rest of them can't believe that Iran is exerting control over this very narrow waterway called the Strait of Hormuz. And he's saying freedom of navigation, international law, and so forth. All the seas. First of all, the United States doesn't have a leg to stand on. They're engaged in piracy globally. They're literally stealing people's oil. Russian tankers, Venezuelan, Iranian, and attacking who they want to attack. So that's a bit rich of them, not to mention militarily attacking these countries. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, legally speaking, Iran has every right under international law to secure that waterway for two reasons. Iran is not a signatory to the UN Convention of the Law of the Seas. I believe it was in 1982. The United States is not either. So Iran, by not signing that, reserved the right to take control at some point in the future, if they needed to take control of the Strait of Hormuz. They also extended their territorial waters, as did Oman, to the point where there is no international water daylight between the territorial waters of the Omanis and the Iranians. So they can joint manage those straits, but obviously Iran's the more powerful country. So that's, legally speaking, they're not in violation of international law. And not only that, but if there even was freedom of navigation or some understanding that there'll be allowed transit there for international ships and so forth, all of that is suspended during a time of war.
Okay.
And that's not a war Iran asked for. But Iran has every right to retaliate to the source of the attacks, which they did, plus to secure that waterway for their national security concerns until such a time where accords are reached and a treaty is signed. And that's the problem with the U.S. They cannot reach an official accord, and they cannot ever sign a treaty with Iran because the political sharks back in Washington will never allow it. The Israeli lobby will never allow any concessions at all to the Iranians. So guess what? The default status quo is going to be Iran is in control of the Straits of Hormuz. Unless the United States wants to sacrifice a large portion of their navy and who knows how many tens of thousands of U.S. troops to try to take it back or wrestle control of it, that ain't going to change, not in any practical sense. So until such a time when the U.S. wants to come to the table as an honest broker or as an honest participant in good faith, then it's going to stay the way it is. It's not going to get any easier. It's only going to get more difficult for the U.S., for their allies, for the region, and globally as well, economically. I cannot see any other scenario other than that. Does that mean there's not a potential for breakthroughs? There's not potential for a cessation of hostilities? Yes, there is that potential, and we've seen intermittent ceasefires, and that's great. However, we're talking about a long-term, sustainable resolution, a political settlement that needs to acknowledge the root causes of the conflict. It's not elective. America thinks that they don't have to acknowledge root causes. It's the same reason why there's no deal with the Ukraine situation, because the U.S. and Europe refuse to acknowledge the root causes of that conflict. And it's a fact. The United States started that civil war with the Maidan coup. That's a fact. And then Europe and NATO basically weaponized it and created the conditions for the war that eventually came and the so-called invasion of Russia invading the Donbass, when in fact all they were doing was the logical conclusion of the collapse of a UN Security Council resolution called 2202, which was the Minsk Peace Accords. They knew that if that collapsed, the French, the Germans, the Americans knew once that lapsed, there's going to be hostilities. And of course, we got hostilities. And then Europe's crying bloody murder. Oh my God, look at Putin, look at the Russians. What are they doing? Well, they're doing exactly what they said they would do if that UN Security Council resolution, which they all voted for, that passed, is basically going to be null and void. So in Russia as well, if you're not going to acknowledge the root causes, then we're just going to carry on to secure our national interests.
So the root causes here, I suppose, goes back to the original statement that I made about controlling the maritime routes and the resources. The US isn't going to give that up easily without a fight. The Chinese set about building the Belt and Road Initiative specifically because they knew that this maritime power would be something the Americans would be loath to lose. So Iran has an option, because from what I've noticed, straight after these negotiations stalled, the Pakistanis, who are the mediators, opened up about 6 land routes for Iran. And then Iran has also got the Caspian Sea, They've got the Russian connection, the North-South corridor. They've got Char-Bahar port as well. They've got, of course, access to Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, all of whom have decent relations with Iran. Even Azerbaijan, although it's antagonistic, but nonetheless they couldn't. I don't think they could withstand Russian and Iranian power to get that route done. So if it's about routes and resources, and America isn't playing ball in terms of maritime side of things, and this blockade is part of that, well, the Iranians have turned around and said that, we're giving you 30 days. 30 days to lift the blockade. It could be a situation where they're giving a timeline so that their ships are allowed out as well, because, of course, the blockade is primarily for Iranian trade to be blocked. Iran has that backup option, as I said, of the coming through the land routes, but they'd ideally like access to the world through the maritime ports and then have a toll placed on any United Arab Emirates or Iraqi or other ships that want to pass through that region, especially the ones who are friendly to the Americans and to the Israelis. So my question is really, how does this play out? If, as very recently, as today, the Americans said, we've started Operation Freedom, i.e. we will protect the ships that want to get out of the Hormuz. And what does that mean? Does that mean they're going to fire on anybody, fire on the Iranian Navy? Are they going to start a war? Is this a pretext for kicking off the war? Because Iran clearly would do something to stop that. Or is it just another face-saving exercise that maybe Trump wants an off-ramp, and by pushing this scenario, he gets the ships to come out and there's some behind-the-scenes deal where actually some oil, etc., gets out because the heat is on Trump as the rest of the world slides into economic depression. Something's going to have to give. This can't carry on.
Well, I think it depends on whether any of those other countries sending ships out of the Persian Gulf trust the United States and their promise to protect. Because that's the other side of this coin. The U.S. is effectively promising to protect the Allied shipping coming out of the Persian Gulf and into the Arabian Sea and then around the world. If they can't do that credibly, then this whole sales pitch just collapses. And then what are they left with? Those are just being antagonists at that point. So they believe that. I think it's both. It's they're also gambling. Trump's a big gambler, and he thinks that the Iranians wouldn't dare fire on our naval frigates. Well, of course they would, and they have said they would, and they have, and they will continue to do so. And then what are you going to do? You're going to escalate the war. So you could look at this like this is the Gulf of Tonkin all over again, because that's how the United States officially entered into a long war. The Vietnam War was through a sort of very shady event in 1964 called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And yeah, it worked then. This is a different situation. This is a completely different. We're not talking about the North Vietnamese here with a guerrilla army. We're talking about a major regional superpower that has basically kind of wrestled control of the region, and not by choice, but because they were forced to do it. And we're talking about Iran. They were forced to do what they've done. But the end result is they've transformed the geopolitics of the region and the world because of that. And that's just a new reality. And you can see some of the Gulf states are waking up to this. Qatar, I think, has woken up to this reality. Clearly, the sea change in their tone, in the rhetoric. Because they're Qataris, you can't accuse them of being stupid right now, because what they've done in terms of being the first Gulf Arab state to kind of step up with a major policy shift and their orientation towards Tehran is very clear. It's not going to be antagonistic. The other ones are a bit slow. They're still kind of hedging,
Bahrain, UAE,
going with
Saudis,
UAE, Saudis, going with America. Oh, we've got our pipeline bypasses. Saudis got the east-west petrol line to Yanbu that will be able to offload oil in the Red Sea. Then the UAE are also constructing their pipeline, but that's always also going to rely on other countries' cooperation. Plus, it will be targeted in the event of hostilities. And pipelines are not difficult to take offline. The Houthis, or the Ansar Allah in Yemen, could take out the Saudi facility at Yanbu, and they've already attacked it before. So it's not like they haven't done this before.
And Hezbollah have cruise missiles, so the Mediterranean could be brought into the equation.
Yeah, they could, but just between Iran and Ansar Allah and Yemen, there's not. They don't really need any help or need any state actors even anymore. They don't need China. They don't need Russia. They have the means within their possession now to exert at least deterrence over the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, and if not total control over the Strait of Hormuz. And it's a credible threat because Iran's already proven and Yemen has proven they're willing to go to the wall for their principles. It's not talk. It's not empty threats. It's not rhetoric. These two countries, Yemen, or this, what they control as we call Yemen, under the control of Ansar Allah, the Houthis, they're the first ones to take on Israel directly, and they've taken on Saudi Arabia. They've taken on the best the West have thrown at them over the last 10 years, 10 plus years. So has Iran. These are the two basically leaders really of the global South now. And they put their money where their mouth is.
The last root cause, which impacts whether there's more war, whether the globe goes into an economic depression, and we get famine, etc., in the world, as Professor Stephen Keen has predicted, because these supply chains and the fertilizer not getting out from that region. Most of the world's fertilizer, nitrogen, etc., comes through the Hormuz. So there are smart people who are predicting that if this continues for a length of time, 3 or 4 months, we could end up within 4 or 5 months having crop failures, having food supply chains interrupted, and the world, you started fighting over loo rolls in the West when COVID kicked in.
Yeah.
And so I don't know whether we're going to have wrestling contests with who gets the toilet rolls and much, much more on the horizon. But the root cause that I'm thinking about is, of course, Israel. Because Israel, of course, seems to have a massive say in what Trump does, and also very closely related to Israel and the American oligarchy is this kind of transcorporate oligarchical multi-millionaire body of individuals and companies, which also profit from war, which also perhaps arguably wanted a meltdown of the economy because neoliberal economics was in big trouble prior to all of Trump's work. So part of me wonders whether Israel and these financial bigwigs actually want war in order to cause a global collapse, and then they can do what was known as the Great Reset, the Agenda 21 stuff. Do you think there's much credibility in that narrative?
I think very much so. I think people who do have the power to move global events and the power to move capital and markets, they have shown throughout history that war has been, if anything, a distraction from system-wide perturbations like an economic collapse that would require an economic reset or a currency, or reserve currency reset. In the case of the U.S. dollar, just kind of gradually degrading in terms of its global reserve status. So this would provide, this crisis, this economic disruption, this disturbance will provide the opportunity to do that. Now, that's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
It's a big conspiracy,
yes,
but it does have historical precedent. So it cannot be ruled out. Neither can the theory that, let's say, the United States' real strategy is to throttle global oil and gas supplies so that it becomes the main vendor of choice, jack up the prices, reap the profits, and then get everybody depending on them by basically their strategies to take out any potential competitors or control them or take over their supply, like they did with Venezuela. What they would like to do with Iran is probably just take it out of the market completely. They effectively took Iraq out of the market after the war. I mean, that was the end result. It wasn't that there was American companies immediately pumping oil out of Iraq. It wasn't. That didn't happen. Syria was also taken offline as a result of the dirty war. And a lot of Russia's export capacity has been severely damaged because of Ukrainian drone attacks. So you look at the big picture there and say, okay, the numbers are shifting. So the United States doesn't have anybody basically attacking its oil and gas infrastructure. They're making record profits. They're booking in supplies to 2030 into Europe. And now Qatar is offline. One of the biggest LNG suppliers, liquefied natural gas to Europe, one of the main ones anyway, was from Qatar. That's now offline. So there is credence to that theory. However, it's proving that there's a master plan behind the scenes with the types of people you have in charge in Washington right now, which seem to be very sloppy, very ham-fisted, that have done their own economy a huge amount of damage, but seem to be really obsessed with optics. In other words, we're winning, we're powerful, we're America. Those seem to be the real priorities there. And you're going to buy and trade from us whether you like it or not. And America first, everyone else second or last. So, but still, is there a cabal in a room somewhere micromanaging this outcome? We can't prove.
We can't prove it.
What we can prove is that the answers to all these questions usually comes down to one question, which is, where is global capital moving? Because at the end of the day, where capital moves, we're talking about the global mass of capital, direct foreign investment, people, everyone's got money. Where do you park that money? What does capital like? What do markets like? They like predictability. They like stability. They like the ability to plan long term. So whether you have some imperial lunatic in Washington that believes he's king of the world and is running tariff wars against everybody and so forth, and is hitting, paying Zelensky to hit Russian oil and gas facilities, and then getting Israel to hit the Iranian ones, knowing that Iran will respond and take out the Qatari ones, and then job done. Whether that's the case or not is one thing, but we can say absolutely for sure that right now capital is not moving into the Gulf. It's not moving into the Middle East, because that was the story before all this kicked off. There's going to be AI revolution. It's going to be powered by the Middle East. And why? Because to meet the baseload, all those data centers that are going to power this US-centric AI revolution require what? They need power to run the baseload for those massive data centers, server farms, huge amounts of air conditioning, cooling, and so forth. Where's that coming from? Well, the Gulf have oil and gas. Let's just do it there. They're putting up the money to front run finance all these projects. Great. They're our new partners. Well, that doesn't look too promising at the moment. So now the capital is moving to where? The most stable location on the planet right now is China.
Yeah.
So global capital is moving to China. So if this was a master plan for Western domination, it's completely backfired.
Well, a master plan perhaps for oligarchs that don't care which country has an ascendancy, and a transfer of power, rather like the argument First, Second World War, the transfer was from Europe to the US, kind of engineered by two unnecessary wars, which destroyed Europe essentially in its colonial power. In the same way, maybe time is up for American imperialism, and it's time for a new order, which is where the sun rises, etc. Maybe, who knows? But Israel, of course, was the other one I added to that question. Is there going to be a greater Israel after all this?
That's an open question right now. Now, I would have said, watching what's happened to Gaza, what's happening in the West Bank, what's happening in Lebanon just a few months ago, to me, it's the fact that nobody could restrain Israel. So based on that fact that nobody is willing to or able to, both willing and able. See, the Europeans are able but not willing. The United States is able but not willing.
Sure.
And the Gulf states are not able and not willing to do anything to stop Israel. Egypt certainly is kind of out of the picture, as is Turkey. Not really. All bark, no bite. So Iran's really the only country, and I would say, surprisingly, Hezbollah, as a non-state actor or a semi-state actor, is also in a position to restrain Israel, which is extraordinary in itself. And also Ansar Allah will be in a position to really, I think, in Yemen, give it 5 years. Give it 10 years. If you thought Yemen was powerful in what they could achieve with very little, just in the last 3 years, wait 10 years. Because look at the progress in Yemen, and that's not because of Iran. That's because of the Yemenis are just incredibly their ingenuity, their kind of entrepreneurial abilities and spirit and their ability to innovate and adapt. They have all that. So give it 10 years. So I'm looking at this landscape. It's massively transforming. And I'm thinking the Greater Israel Project, it's going to be kind of difficult, really, to execute that. Not least of all because Israel's reputation internationally is just completely in tatters as a result of what they have themselves have done and said and shown the world. So I don't think the world is going to accept the Greater Israel Project. I don't even know if Israelis will be able to support a Greater Israel Project. And that's the whole point. They thought with the Syrian model, they called it, which was to demilitarize their neighbor, decapitate the government, change the regime, demilitarize it, destroy any ability to defend itself or fight back, go and annex their land, take the Golan Heights, take Mount Hermon, take the Druze corridor, and so no one's going to stop them, and they can continue that, do the same to Iraq, do the same to Jordan and Saudi Arabia and so forth. But it's not clear that they're going to be able to achieve that now. I mean, if the titular head of this Greater Israel Project has to be Benjamin Netanyahu, the driving force. He wanted to see himself as the heir apparent to Ben-Gurion, the new father of the modern Israeli state, or the father of Greater Israel. That's how Netanyahu wants to be seen, his legacy in the history books, or in the Jewish history books. He wants to be that person. But having come so close to achieving that, the irony, of course, is they pushed too fast, too hard, and the local and global backlash has been unbelievable and severe. And I don't think Israel will ever be able to recover its reputation, its brand. So as a Zionist state or entity or project, I don't think they'll be able to recover.
Well, you've given us a whirlwind tour in a short period of time. Thank you for that kind of analysis. And it's very hard to look in crystal balls, predict anything in the current state of affairs. But we've, I think, mapped many issues around the critical issue of peace between Iran and the USA. Of course, in Israel, you have to add that name to that list. It seems as though there is an impasse. It seems as though Iran has a more powerful deck of cards. It has far more leverage at the moment. It's down to Donald Trump whether he wants to ultimately agree to what he would regard as a bad deal, something worse than prior to the actual war that he began at the behest or in partnership with Israel, or whether he's willing to continue the war. Will he dedicate more arms, more military hardware against Iran? Will he go for a ground invasion, which is highly unlikely to be successful? Or is Iran going to be able to persuade them that it should be recognized essentially as the fourth center of power in the world now, as a superpower in its own right, and that it should be respected, not only in terms of its sovereignty, but also in terms of what it can offer the rest of the world? Clearly, there's a huge knowledge economy there, which is being now unearthed with more and more of analysis of Iran going on. Will the West agree to bringing Iran onto the table? And will they stop sanctioning? Will they stop bullying it? And will they accept in the world that they have a place to coexist as equal partners with other rising powers in the world? Or are they going to fight to the death and bring most of the world down with them in the process? Patrick Henningsen, thank you very much. Do watch Patrick's show, The 21st Century, Wire, and also do support DDP. As I said at the beginning of the show, we need your support. Patrick needs it. Without you, we can't maintain these sort of programs. Support us so that we can keep providing this service of truth, because otherwise I have no hope with state-run media or with corporate-run media. They will give you the lies and take you to some alternate illusion, which is really not anywhere near the truth. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.